Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of Player's Perspective, the interview series where I talk to fellow YouTubers and find out a bit about them. Standing by with me is a gaming journalist and freelance writer who runs his own website, where you can find his musings on the games industry, reviews, and a whole lot more in an entertaining and informative style. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome George Weidman of SuperBunnyhop.com. George, welcome to the show.
Hello, Patrick. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So, George, you are a games journalist, primarily on YouTube. However, you do have your website, the aforementioned Super Bunny Hop, where you
Yeah.
where you cover game reviews,
Uh,
critical close-ups, and developer interviews, as well as some LP content as well. So, best place to start would be, how did you get into journalism?
well, for starters, I went to college for it. I have two degrees. One's journalism, the other's sociology. The sociology is just kind of a throwaway degree for the fun. I really am into a lot of the academic writing behind it, but journalism is the one that I wanted to make my career out of. And I originally started out at Creative Loafing, interning them, and then moving on to freelance writing from there. But I guess the problem with that is is the pay, frankly. If you're not a full-time editor at a publication, then you're not really paid very much of a livable wage. I started Super Bunny Hop kind of as more of a portfolio piece than a way to pay my own way out of a post collegiate existence. And that's kind of still the position that it's in. I mean, unless you're like a super duper popular YouTuber, you're not really going to be getting paid a livable wage at this stuff either. So Super Bunny Hop is more as a way for me to kind of like prove myself as a journalist in a kind of weird way, in that I'm mainly doing game journalism, which of course wasn't what I was doing at Creative Loafing, which is like the local alt weekly newspaper in Atlanta. I was doing transportation news over there, believe it or not, which is an incredibly different field. But you see a lot of problems kind of carry over from one to another. Especially after starting your own publication, you end up realizing, number one, just how much work and effort goes into creating usable information packages that people can talk about and get informed and entertained by. And number two is, who is the gatekeeper of that information? Like, I see a big scandal this week involved journalists who were covering Watch Dogs getting free tablets for an event in Paris. And it was really funny when I was reading comments about this. Comments in the slash r games subreddit, which is where I usually get my news from, which is partially shameful, but they're a nice aggregator of a lot of major outlets. But a lot of people were saying that that stuff doesn't happen in any other outlets of journalism except for game journalism, and that's not true. Like when I was doing really boring traditional transportation news covering stuff the government was doing to roads in Atlanta, like the absolute some of the most hardest dull news you can write on, I was still getting really weird packages and gifts from places like the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. They were like giving me free membership and stuff. And I got a award from them as well. And I was really weird little trinkets like free bike lights. It I don't know. It crosses over. You should have seen the closets that they have in that office for the music reviewers. Like those guys get a lot of miscellaneous swag for the stuff that they're reviewing. But even when you are covering local politics and stuff, you end up getting embedded in a world of reciprocation where it at and on another level, like dinners, I guess, kind of count as a gift that journalists would give people they're trying to hook up with to get stories out of, and that goes both ways as well.
It definitely sounds like a real can of worms.
Yeah, kind of, but it's I don't know. Like I love journalism and everything, but it's going to be a eternally misunderstood profession, because a lot of the process of writing news stories and presenting it to people comes with the burden of having to select the information that you think is worthy for other people to hear. And a lot of times you have really interesting off the record conversations that just kind of have to go down a hole, or a lot of times you might want to withhold a story because it might compromise someone's safety and personal well-being, even if it has information that might benefit the safety and well-being of other people. And a lot of hard decisions get made, a lot of shady decisions get made, and a lot of the power is also in the wrong place. In the world of video games, the people who have the information that the journalists have to cover are the publishers and the developers. And ultimately, another problem is that journalism for video games is a total luxury. Like, you have a very a very dire need for journalism in your life in order to tell you like whether or not you're about to get drafted for a war, like what the weather looks like today. Really recently and relevant is what to do with your health insurance since Obamacare is rolling out. But in video games, the only really reliable question a journalist can ask is what kind of products are coming out and what do we think of products that recently came out, which is what reviews are. And reviews don't really typically fit the usual category of journalistic content that you see in a traditional old guard newspaper. Journalists, I mean, reviews are not news. They're a different section. They're an editorial article, and people end up valuing that a lot more than hard news in the world of video game fans, which really weirds me out to a certain extent because I can work my butt off making a YouTube video where I travel 3,000 miles across the country and like put together this scoop of really weird upcoming products like the VR video that I did for GDC and make a nice roundup of the products with both words from the people who are making the products and from me after I try out those products. And that will end up getting less views than me complaining in my bedroom about Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. And that the strange and wild journey that was Bunnyhop has steadily like grown a little bit discouraging, and that people tend to value the information that requires the least amount of effort to gain. That's depressing, but that kind of rounds up what I think of journalism, Bunnyhop, and how the two relate to each other. A lot of what Bunnyhop does not do is journalism, but a lot of the stuff that is journalism on there does not get it does not get as valued by its viewers as the other things.
Well, having said that, you've had your articles featured on Kotaku, Giant Bomb, and Destructoid, so those other outlets would hopefully help to give exposure to what you have to say.
Yeah, and one thing that you learn when you end up making your own publication, which I guess would include a YouTube channel or your own website, is that the bigger fish in the sea are really the lifeblood of the smaller outlets like mine. And I say that now, but it's steadily becoming a bigger and bigger outlet, which is nice because then it might be able to survive on its own. But back in the early days, Bunnyhop was entirely carried by Errant Signal, Chris Franklin of Errant Signal, and pretty much if it weren't for him, it wouldn't have had an audience to start out with. And without that audience, without, for one, getting some kind of exposure for a portfolio piece that you want to be proud of, and for two, getting some kind of monetary incentive to keep making this stuff, you don't have a reason to make this stuff. So in the beginning, it was basically Chris Franklin is the only reason why Bunnyhop kept going. And then later on, it ended up getting exposure from Total Biscuit, and Angry Joe ended up liking a video I did on the NRA last year, in which I talked about game violence and gun violence and the crisscross between the two and the NRA's perception of that crisscross. And later on, then when I went to GDC a couple months after that, the coverage I did of GDC ended up getting passed around on a Kotaku article, and I did a video about a Gary's Mod role-playing server where you were like Nazis, and that was weird and interesting to talk about, and that's the one that landed on Giant Bomb. And you see traffic and spikes every time that happens. It brings in a lot of new audience, and that new audience are going to be your regular viewers who will end up letting your thing carry on its own. So I guess from what I have experienced, my number one piece of advice for anyone trying to start an entrepreneurial project is to get endorsements and recommendations from the established players in the field, rather than just trying to go without them. Like, you can't do this by yourself. You really need the support of the existing industry in order to exist in this industry.
Distribution is very important. for particularly for journalists, they need that to survive.
Yeah, that's actually what I think is a greater purpose for the like button on YouTube is not necessarily for people to share things with family and friends, but for celebrities to share things with hundreds of thousands of their audience members, because then you end up having a great way to kickstart newer, smaller projects without any kind of financial repercussions. And that like button is there for partially what I think is one of the reasons why they ended up putting that like button there. It's kind of like when you're driving on the highway on a really long road trip and you see all the trucks on there, and it makes you realize that the highway isn't there for people to go on road trips or to like get to their job 15 to 30 miles away. It's so that really important, really expensive shipments can get made in a fast and efficient manner. It's an infrastructure that is designed to help people professionally as well as recreationally.
So, as your position as a gaming journalist, what would you say is not necessarily yours, but journalists as a whole? What would you say their influence are on consumers?
A fairly large one that I think is coming to shrink over the next coming years. As new media gets bigger, people are going to rely on word of mouth more than traditional journalistic outlets, which I don't have a problem with, and I actually think is the solution to a lot of problems that people have with gaming media. Because like back in the day when gaming journalism was mostly exposed through magazines, you were getting a very filtered feed of information from professional writers and editors who had to approve of their stuff to appear to people. Whereas nowadays, with the democratization of media comes the democratization of preference. I think that in a lot of ways, the game industry is much more healthier than it was back when games magazines were the only ways to get journalism out. And I think that what we have kind of gotten from the democratization of media is a democratization of choice and genres in games. Nowadays, you can have something as simple as a goat simulator end up being an actual commercial product being sold to people that would have been a much more limited, quirky story that journalists might not have taken seriously a while ago. But now that everyone can kind of proliferate their preferences, in this case, their sense of humor together, you end up getting exposure for products that might not have been viable several years ago. And I think that we have a healthy marketplace for it. The more video games we have to play, the better, right? I mean, hopefully at least. Hopefully they meet some kind of quality standard. But I think that when you have a lot of people making a lot of things and a lot of people are buying them, you have a healthy marketplace. And
Speak
same goes with the marketplace of information.
Speaking of quality assurance, Arkham Origins had a few problems when that was released.
Oh yeah, actually, oh God, I'm gonna have everyone's gonna unsubscribe to people as soon as I say this. But I actually don't really have much of a preference for the Batman Arkham games. I enjoyed Arkham Asylum, but not enough to really delve into the sequel. And everyone says that Arkham City is the high point of this trilogy, and I do want to start playing it eventually, but I guess I haven't really been eager to start it up because of my kind of mildly positive but not excessively positive reaction to the first game. I'm sure that when I do see it, I'll want to start playing Arkham Origins as well, just to see how that turned out. Reviews weren't positive, but it's always interesting to see what people are talking about. But yeah, I guess as far as Arkham Origins go, I haven't played it. That's why I don't want to jump into the third one without playing the second one. And even though I have the second one on my Steam account ready to go, I want to get a whole bunch of backlog games out of the way first before I dive into that one, which I actually am really looking forward to doing someday. I just don't know when. Not a lot of time.
Then we have Arkham Knight to look forward to at the end of the year.
Oh yeah, and that's Rocksteady again.
Yes, that's
So
I'm back to
everyone's
Rocksteady.
really looking forward to it. They're supposed to be good at this. I'd really hate to see the Arkham games turn into a yearly franchise like Call of Duty. I think there's a lot more creative integrity in making a licensed superhero game than just a run of the mill average gray shooter like Call of Duty. That business model of turning Call of Duty into a yearly series is fucking toxic.
Or indeed the Assassin's Creed franchise.
Yeah, that too. That God, that had so much potential. It's just you remember back in 2007 when you remember what it was like those first 5 minutes of Assassin's Creed when you saw how they framed this narrative inside of the memories of a sci-fi guy.
Hmm.
It seemed like they had a very flexible framework for creating any kind of historical setting that they ever would want to, but they ended up kind of perverting it through the success of AC2, and we had AC2 sequels go on and on and on for that string of years. It's nice that they're diversifying, and I think that after AC4, hopefully we'll start to see more diverse settings and a creative spark to that series. But I really kind of fell out of the loop on that one when they were going through the Ezio games. I couldn't follow that story all the way to its conclusion. They just seemed to drag on and on.
Yeah, they definitely went into overkill, I think.
Yeah, especially with a series that has so much creative potential.
So if we sort of switch gears and talk about your time at geosaga.net, where you
Oh
you
yeah.
covered a bike tour from Atlanta to San Diego, and it was
Yeah,
and you put up blog posts and daily updates. So has cycling
that
always been
was
a hobby of yours?
yeah, yeah, kind of. That was an exciting time in my life, as you can probably imagine. I really got into bicycling as a means to get to my job that was very close, but not close enough to walk to. But it ended up kind of evolving into a secondary passion of mine next to video games because it's really fun. Like it feels like a little miniature RPG adventure when you go on a long all day bike ride out to some mystical far away magical place that's really just a suburban strip mall outside of Atlanta. But when you put that much effort into getting somewhere, it makes it feel rewarding. I don't know if it's just part of the natural endorphins that your body produces after a good workout, but I absolutely positively love the feeling of getting someplace by bike instead of any other means of transportation. And that one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I decided that I wanted to bicycle all the way across the country. And in order, that was right after I graduated college too. So in order to keep my writing skills fresh and chiseled, I wanted to start a blog and write something every day about it and share that with friends and family along the way. And it ended up attracting a good number of strangers from the internet as well. I think 1,500 people were reading that by the time I arrived in San Francisco, and that site is totally dead now. In a weird way, a lot like the actual Super Bunnyhop site. But GeoSaga is totally dead, but still a really really proud project that I absolutely look back on with so much fondness. A lot of evenings I load it up and I just look at my old bicycle route and I trace it with Google Street View and remember what it was like to be out in the desert panting and sweating all day with absolutely in the absolute most undeveloped, uncivilized part of the country. And I also fell in love with deserts as a byproduct of the stakes of that adventure too. America has a really beautiful countryside the further you go west. Maybe it's because I've always grown up on the East Coast, but once I got out of that thicket of trees, I just kind of fell in love with the freedom and the openness of the southwestern American desert.
Sounds like a really fascinating journey you had.
Yeah, it totally was. I had this one crazy evening where my day job, they ended up calling me while I was sleeping on a mattress on the rooftop of a papercrete pueblo at this hippie hostel in the town of Marathon, Texas. And they wanted me to come into work the day after the next day. And I was like, guys, I'm on a bicycle 2,000 miles away from home in the middle of the desert in Texas and I can't make it. And it really freaked me out for a good 2 hours. I was like calling people, trying to figure out how to get those shifts covered. And it ended up at some point where I just literally said fuck it and decided to kind of stop worrying for a second and love how isolated and stranded I was. Because even then, there was literally no way I could have been able to get to an airport and come back home in time. And I just told them to deal with it. And it felt really, really liberating and amazing to kind of get my priorities straight for once in my life, where it was more about being out in the wilderness and surviving than it was about kind of catching up on the very burdensome job that I had left behind that I no longer needed out there in a weird way. And they weren't happy for with me, but for some reason they ended up keeping me on for 3 more years. So I guess I was polite about that little episode.
So aside from that huge tour across the country, do you have a real general interest in traveling?
Kind of. I really enjoy traveling through America, I guess. I learned a lot of stuff on that trip, and I learned that I kind of have a sense of wanderlust that Atlanta is never really going to be able to satisfy. I need to get out of this city. Like that's I guess one super personal detail of my life that people might not have wanted to hear, but I am utterly unsatisfied with where I am because Atlanta does not have a good bicycle infrastructure. It doesn't have a good street life. It doesn't really compare to other American cities in terms of things to go or do at weird hours of the night when you need something to go to do. And I I don't know. When you're they absolutely dwarf Atlanta in comparison to size, but when you're on the ground in San Francisco or in New York, there's like food available. When you're walking around Atlanta, there are food deserts where the closest grocery store is like 15 miles away. You have to drive to get there because Atlanta is all about urban sprawl, and it's it's not as accommodating of a city despite its size. And that's always really frustrated me. Plus there's a real thrill to just landing in a new place and having to figure stuff out for your first few hours while you're there that really compels me. I enjoy getting lost in a subway system that I'm not familiar with, or in an airport that I'm not familiar with, and it kind of reminds me of who I am and what it's how complicated the world is and what it's like to be caught up in society that's this really really complicated society that we live in, and just how many little details get people to work together. When you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective, it makes you realize just what a little small cog in the machine you are.
Yeah, I had a similar experience last year when I went on holiday, a short holiday to Los Angeles, and I had a few friends out there, and it's just fun to sort of go somewhere that you've never been before and see how things turn up when you arrive.
It gives you perspective because like you're from the UK, like it's crazy seeing 3,000 miles of ground pass underneath me from an airplane, and it's even crazier seeing it pass underneath me from a freaking bicycle. But when I can't imagine what it's like going so much longer of a distance across the Atlantic Ocean to see what kind of a culture shock you get from that. It makes the planet feel small, it makes you feel small, and it makes you realize just how massive and complicated human society is.
Yeah, it's particularly if you go really further out. I remember when I visited New Zealand, and when once you're there, you get this profound feeling of isolation. It's very hard to describe because you just feel it. This inside of you feel this isolation that you are so far away from the rest of the world.
Yeah, someday when I grow up and get rich, I totally need to just start a international clumsiness tour and toss everything off to the side and just travel around the world with some savings money, because I haven't done a lot of international traveling. The most exotic faraway place I've been was Canada. I've been to Montreal and Toronto, and as far as I could tell, I was a kid at the time. As far as I could tell, it looked exactly like the same cities you see in America. But as hard and complicated as it is trying to find my way around the subway system of like LA or San Francisco, I kind of want to see what it's like to find my way around the subway system of like Tokyo or Moscow, just to see if I'm up to the challenge. Like if I can manage that, there's going to be something really gratifying and accomplishing about figuring that out.
So, George, what future projects do you have down the pipeline?
Basically just bunny hop until it ends up leading on to something bigger than that, which I hope it does. I mean, if any if any full-time editors are listening to this thing, please hire me. I think bunny hop is a decent resume piece. But I am looking on expanding bunny hop down the line in like a 4 month time period. I'm actually involved with the website launch that's going to happen. I don't know if it will happen before or after this video airs, but I can't really talk about that a lot, but you'll know it when it does happen. And I have some crazy video ideas that I don't want to spoil too much because it's really going to shock people when this happens. But I will say that the next critical close up is probably not what you expect it to be, and that there's also another video that I have planned that's going to be just as, if not bigger than a critical close up, that's going to involve a mild bit of work from the viewer to unravel. That's one hint I want to give away. But yeah, in the meantime, occasionally I write freelance pieces for Creative Loafing still and for other various game publications. I've stopped doing that less and less because the freelancer's fee these days is just offensive. But I don't know. It's not that bad of a situation to be in because I've always got Bunny Hop to fall back on. And that's basically what my life is steadily turning into is Bunny Hop and nothing else.
Well, that is definitely something to keep you going. So, George, I'm going to ask you a question now that I ask everyone who comes on here, and that is, if a game developer were to come up to you and say, George, you can create any video game you like, what would it be and why?
I can't wait to answer this because I've always had dreams about a video game that plays like Unreal Tournament 2004 bot matches, but in a single player campaign, where it kind of does what like the hack and slash Ninja Gaidens and Bayonettas do for third person action games from a first person shooter standpoint. I want to someday in my life before I'm old play a single player first person shooter that has extremely challenging enemies that move really fast with slow splash damagey weapons like in an old arena shooter. And a lot of arena shooters that are coming out these days, I've really enjoyed Tower of Guns. I kind of want to see what drunken robot pornography does. And but none of them really kind of captured the feel and excitement that I had of just playing with bots in an old Unreal Tournament game. Playing with humans is one thing, but when you're playing with bots, you're kind of like just barely better at them to a certain degree that makes you feel really good about zipping around these maps really fast and twisting and turning your view every now and then and doing some crazy impossible super speedy movements that oftentimes don't translate as well when you're fighting other human beings. I want to play a game where you're in a single player situation with a story that you're progressing as you play through. And instead of like shooting soldiers who take cover in a room, you're shooting ninjas that are zipping around through the ceiling and moving extremely fast and take a lot of work to bring down. And that's the basic common enemy of the game. I'd really like to see that happen at some point. And it doesn't even sound like that far-fetched of a concept. This sounds like a very basic conventional shooter we're talking about, but I bet I would have a lot of fun with that. I'm just a fan of speedy things in general, and that's probably the one outlet for speedy, fast, skill-based gameplay that I have not really seen developers take advantage of in a way that maybe they should.
Yeah, and that really definitely sounds pretty awesome. I'd love to see something like that exist one day.
I know. I used to have a dream game that I would have answered this question with. It would play like a Total War game, but from the perspective of a little foot soldier, like in Mountain Blade, like basically Mountain Blade with Total War production values. But I think Kingdom Come Deliverance is actually going to take a stab at filling that hole in my life. So that's not as much of a pipe dream as my first person Unreal Tournament bot match, but from a single player campaign game that I still haven't really seen a quality contender appear to meet that niche for.
So, George, what do you have to say to all of the people who have followed you throughout your since you started Super Bunny Hop and those who have read your articles? What would you have to say to all of them?
It's been a crazy journey, and I hope I'm good enough for you guys. I have a pretty bad inferiority complex, I think, in a lot of ways, but people tend to be really impressed with the stuff I do, so that makes me feel good. But God, I can't go back and watch my old videos. They make me feel horrible because I see things that I feel like I've gotten better at, but from the perspective of the person doing it, I'm always thinking that, maybe I haven't. Maybe I still look ugly when I go on camera. Maybe I still need a haircut. Maybe I still am really bad at cracking jokes, and I don't know. Like in the first 2 weeks, I had 4 weeks of content planned out before I launched the channel, and the first two reviews were very heavily Plinkett inspired, and I didn't know I was doing it, but for some reason ended up kind of taking it further and further and further to a point now where I can't stop. I'm also not really in a position where I can put something out there that's going to disappoint anyone, and it just it's been a really crazy journey, I guess, and I appreciate I appreciate all the support that I get. I just really am scared of disappointing people at this point.
Well, I'm sure good things will come as you move forward.
Yeah, I have some crazy ideas like I was talking about earlier. I don't want to talk to them in public because then that would spoil the fun of when it comes out. But when it comes out, you guys are in for one hell of a video when it eventually does get ready. Hopefully it won't take me more long than 2 months. And it's not a critical close up either. It's gonna really take you guys out of left field and surprise you.
Awesome stuff. So, George, where can we find you on the internet?
YouTube.com/bunnyhop show. I would actually prefer people to go there before the superbunnyhop.com website because the website, I originally thought it would be a nice outlet for written content. It didn't really turn into that once I discovered that I could write freelance for it somewhere else. But it's more like a portal for the videos. I don't really know what it serves at this point, but I guess I could update it with information about Super Bunny Hop that isn't topically relevant for other topics. But it's just I'm at a point now where I find it easier to make a video out of a topic than I do a written article, which isn't what I was trained for. It's not what I'm educated for, but it's now what I feel most comfortable doing. So youtube.com/bunnyhop show, twitter.com/super bunnyhop, if that's how they're doing their URLs these days. um I spend a lot of time on Twitter and YouTube, and that is where you will find me and my stuff.
Great stuff. So, all of those links will be in the description below this video if you would like to check those out. So, George, it's been really awesome talking to you today, man.
Oh yeah, totally. I really enjoyed that, especially since I got to talk about not video games for once. I could go on for days about that bike trip, but I don't want to I don't want to push it in a kind of exploitive way since I am a video game thing at this point in my life. So thanks for that. I really enjoyed letting off some bottled up bicycling adventures that I've always wanted to talk to people about.